Hi Tom, hi viewers.
Hello Jace, hello everyone. Happy new haircut, mate.
Oh, thank you very much indeed. Yeah, well the sun's out, so I'm hoping that the shorter haircut will alleviate some of the sweating, possibly, especially after last night's match. But we'll talk about that later.
I think that falls under the too much information stuff, Jay.
Yeah. That's fair enough. Yeah, I mean,
I've been shorn too.
You have been shorn too. Yeah. Nice little crescent moon you got there.
Lovely.
Right, next week, the government is promising us Freedom Day. Freedom Day. That's a rather populist title to you, Tom.
Just a bit, yeah, just a bit of a populist nationalist title, yes. Aren't they doing well, the government? Aren't they doing brilliantly? Yes, very excited, obviously, to have, Freedom Day, the freedom to go and catch COVID and for it to be all my fault.
Yeah, individual responsibility. They don't take any individual responsibility. So they seem to have two contrasting ideologies. One that they advocate for us, and then the other one that they completely ignore for them. But I tell you what, I really want to focus on here, Tom, when we talk about Freedom Day, which is in itself, as I say, it's just a label that the government have adopted for the tabloid generation. But I want to focus on a report in the Lancet. Now, the Lancet is one of the most respected medical journals, not just in the UK, but across the world. And it's absolutely damning of the government's intentions. And I suspect that behind the scene, the so-called medical specialists are also towing a line, I suspect, a political line, because you know that they've been told that they can't contradict the politician who's at the podium. So you know damn well also that they are probably having to bite their tongue behind the scene, and that their credibility is being affected, and it's been affected all the way through. You only have to watch Twitter, for example, to look at, the Chris Twitty has been, sometimes he's been really, really applauded, and sometimes he's been absolutely annihilated. And he sounds like a really nice guy. The reports I've heard from people who've worked with him in hospitals are extremely positive. But I just think sometimes he's found himself out of his depth in the fact that you have the likes of Matthew Hancock, Sajid Javid now, and Boris Johnson, amongst others, who have explained to him that it's not about medicine half the time. It's about politics. It's about winning votes. It's about saying things to the people that make them feel better. But if we turn to the Lancet, and I'm sure Chris Whitty would want us to turn to the Lancet and do some actual research, and obviously I'm not going to read it out. But they identify a whole range of things that we should be concerned of. And the first ones are about children, about young people, about the education system. And I think that there's a point that we're about to go into summer holiday. Apparently, people are predicting a really hot spell, which is not friendly to viruses. So it's a time if you are going to open things up a little bit more, as we did last summer. This is it. But I think we need to look at some of the points that the Lancet have made and take them extremely seriously. If I can just go through, as I say, a few of these. You've got third preliminary modelling data suggests that the government strategy provides fertile ground for the emergence of a vaccine-resistant variant. What are we going to do, Tom, if in 2 or 3 months' time, instead of having the Delta variant, we have a vaccine-resistant variant in which all of that time and effort that's been spent on creating these vaccines becomes entirely superfluous?
Yeah, I mean, it's our worst nightmare, and the worst nightmare of scientists that have worked so hard to produce vaccines and to advise governments and give governments information to make sensible, appropriate decisions to protect the public as best they can. Of course, our governments have regularly made decisions that are against the science, despite continually saying they're guided by the science. They have continually throughout the last year made decisions that are against the scientific evidence and advice that they're given, which is really shocking. And in this instance, you know, this is the scientific voices are very, very strong since Monday in saying that there are grave concerns amongst the scientists, based partly on their modelling of current cases, which is zooming up of the Delta variant. You know, Boris Johnson 3 weeks ago delayed the so-called Freedom Day on the basis that the Delta variant was rising and of concern. The number of cases that day was 10,000 and something, just over 10,000. 3 weeks later, on Monday of this week, Johnson announced that the government were lifting those mandates for the restrictions or precautions, and the number of cases on Monday was 20. I think it was 27,000 and something. A day later, Boris Johnson announces that they expect, and the modelling shows that it will soon. It's doubling every 9 days approximately. So they will soon expect it to hit 50,000 per day, and then 100,000 per day. So what a time to announce the lifting of these, you know, government mandated restrictions. Bizarre. You know, there is really sad. And I want to make a really important point to everyone viewing this, because it's something that obviously a lot of people have misunderstood and got wrong. And the government knew people would, the newspapers knew that people would misunderstand this, and they're quite happy about that. Boris Johnson on Monday did not say that there's no need anymore for mask wearing or social distancing. That's how people have interpreted it. People all over the internet going, yay, no more mask wearing, yay, no more social distancing. Government did not say that whatsoever. What Boris Johnson announced on Monday was, as of the 19th of July, the government themselves will no longer be mandating those things. They will not be, you know, enforcing restrictions, mandating the use of masks and social distancing. And instead, they are leaving it up to us to decide, you know, when we think those adopting those measures is sensible. And immediately, the scientists said two things. They said, this is a really bad idea for Johnson to be announcing this at this moment in time, with the Delta cases rising and the concerns about new vaccine resistant variants coming, you know, potentially arising from it, and they also said, you know, that the scientists are still strongly advising people to wear masks and socially distance, particularly indoors, particularly in unventilated areas, to wear masks in places where there's a lack of social distancing, like public transport. So people have misunderstood it and gone, yay, we don't have to wear masks or social distance anymore. They've misunderstood what Johnson said, and he knew they would, and he's fine with it. But everyone listening, everyone watching needs to know, he didn't say that. He said, we're no longer telling you, it's up to you. And the scientists are saying you still should.
But have they misunderstood it, or have they been pushed in a particular direction by the media that they interact with to understand something in a particular way? So it's not that they've misunderstood it. They've had the Daily Express and the Daily Mail and the Sun and the Spectator and whoever else, LBC, you know, pumping it down their throats that, hey, now the state has told you no longer by law have to wear it. So if you spent your time, let's say 18 months, being told by the state that you must do something, and then the state turns around and said, now you no longer have to in law, for a lot of people, it is simply just a green light that's being reinforced by the press for them to formulate a particular perspective that it's almost beyond their control. Because, you know, let's face it, all the way through, Boris Johnson has said things that you'd probably have to have, you know, a degree in ancient languages in order to understand a word that he's saying, because he contradicts himself while he's breathing in.
Yeah.
And he refuses to answer questions. And yesterday we saw in the parliamentary committee in which he was being pushed on whether he's telling untruths, and he even lied about lying. What he did was he gave some completely irrelevant anecdote, excuse me, under questioning, that had absolutely no relevance to the question. He was questioned about whether he sacked Matthew Hancock, and he started drivelling on about the £350 million on the side of a bus and how the statistics back him up. There isn't any statistics out there that come from valid data that back him up. But for him, that's become irrelevant. But that's another issue. So I think the problem is, if you lie, at some point people just create their own truth from the words that come out of your mouth. And it doesn't have to be, a sentence. It doesn't have to be a paragraph. It's just taking random words and putting them together to formulate something that in your brain makes you feel better.
Yeah.
I think that's where UK PLC has got to. And it's not just obviously here, it's many other parts of the world as well, where you have right-wing politicians who've now manufactured a way to control large chunks of their population. If we can just continue, sorry, Tom, with this,
yeah,
this would place all at risk, including those already vaccinated within the UK and globally. While vaccines can be updated, this requires time and resources, leaving many exposed to the interim. Spread of potentially more transmissible escape variants will disproportionately affect the most disadvantaged in our country and other countries with poor access to vaccines. So here we have a particular demographic that the government pay lip service to when they have to, when they're put under pressure. But we can see by policy outcomes that the Conservatives have hardly ever given a stuff about those people who are vulnerable. And they only ever do it when they're really put under pressure, for example, like Marcus Rashford. Or they just leave it to charities or individual community groups to fill the void. Fourth, this strategy will have a significant impact on health services and exhausted healthcare staff. The same healthcare staff who have been asking for a significant pay rise and be told by the government that they can't have one, who have not yet recovered from previous infection waves. The link between cases and hospital admissions has not been broken, and rising case numbers will inevitably lead to increased hospital admissions, applying a further pressure at a time when millions of people are waiting for medical procedures and routine care. So you've got people who are now going to be much more vulnerable to COVID, whilst at the same time fighting off cancers and heart disease and diabetes and all these other types of illnesses. Yes, that they found, for example, over an 18-month period that they've had a lot less access to the healthcare service in order to treat these. Not no access, but there has been less access. But whose fault is that? That's the fault of years and years and years of underfunding of the National Health Service. That is the fault of, and I'm not don't care either way in terms of the vote, but that's the fault of the way in which the Tories have handled Brexit and alienated hundreds of thousands of European people who've worked in our National Health Service and other care services across the country. We are now seeing this morning the report out that there is a massive issue in terms of being able to get people in employment-based situations to come forward and work in this country, either domestically or from outside. We've got the CBI shouting from the rooftop saying that we need to relax immigration rules. All the while, the government continues to play its populist nonsense to a certain demographic in the country who are often, and not always, but often overtly racist and xenophobic. So we're appealing to a group of people who are hostile to those around them, hostile to humanity, who are very low levels of empathy. And we're calling that sort of a healthy democratic society. Not for me. Fifth, as deprived communities are more exposed to and more at risk from COVID, these policies will continue to disproportionately affect the most vulnerable and marginalized, deepening inequalities. So not only are we saying that the situation is bad, we're saying that the situation is going to get a whole lot worse.
Yeah.
And just finishing off. In light of these grave risks and given the vaccination offers the prospect of quickly reaching the same goal of population immunity without incurring them, we consider any strategy that tolerates high levels of infection to be both unethical and illogical. So this is what we're talking about here now. The Lancet, one of the most esteemed medical journals on the planet, and it's extremely damning of this government, and yet this government, by pushing its distorted, inaccurate message through the media, especially through the gutter press, the right-wing, sometimes far-right press, we are being given information that is simply wrong and, according to the Lancet and according to many others, will kill a lot of people in the long term. And also, in terms of their morbidity, they have long COVID, they will be ill, they'll be unable to work, they'll be suffering. So what this tells me, just finishing off, Tom, sorry, but what this tells me is the government doesn't give us stuff about healthcare. It only gives us stuff about its ideology.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, you mentioned an important thing there. We read that over 1 million people in this country now have long COVID, suffering with symptoms. Don't know whether, for many of those people, they don't know whether those symptoms will be persistent or, indefinite or permanent. For some of those people, it might affect their ability to ever work again. Really serious matter, and the implications for them and their families, for our health system, our healthcare system, our NHS in the future, for benefit welfare budget in future if large numbers of people are unable to work for the rest of their life. I mean, these are shocking, appalling consequences that the Tories are creating and stacking up for future generations for the next 20, 30, 50 years for our country, on top of, Brexit economic effects and other things. So, you're right. I mean, people say that, you should go into politics, become an MP if you wish to serve. I never get that feeling from Conservatives. I sometimes get that from other parties, if you like, that their intention is to serve and to try to enact bring into law and enact policies that benefit the vast majority of the population. I don't get that from the Conservatives. I get an ideology and policies that are based around enriching and benefiting the richest 1%, the richest and most powerful 1%. And all I get from their pandemic strategy and other things, like you say, their sort of populist nationalism designed to appeal to a certain demographic of voters, all I get from them is how do we lie and spin propaganda in a way that will get certain people to vote for us, enough people to vote for us so we can stay in power, so we can continue stealing all the money for ourselves and our rich mates and our donors.
And that, Tom, is who they serve. They do serve, they just don't serve us.
Aha, that's a good point. So who are they serving, Jace?
They're serving billionaires, they're serving lobbyists, they're serving people who can give them opportunities later on down the line. They're serving people who fund them now in terms of their party and individually. They're serving the shadows, if you like, the people in the darkness who are extremely wealthy, extremely powerful, and continue to be generation upon generation, who just put them in as puppets, having put them through public schools usually. They come from a certain kind of background. They're quite debased. They are low levels of empathy and understanding of other people's experiences. They're very sort of supremacist in the idea that they are born for the role, and that we should be subservient to their policies and to their soundbites. And of course, what we tend to find within individual society is more and more people start to question and challenge, and less people become subservient. So therefore, you have to create new control mechanisms, more control structures to try and keep them in line. and we're getting off topic now, we'll finish on this, but we saw that a lot between 2015 and 2019 with all the lies and garbage that was served up about Jeremy Corbyn and those people who supported it. So, I mean, back to the Lancet, Tom, just very quickly, back to the Lancet. It is a profound document that tells us that going forward, we should not be listening to this government. So for those people that do, and if they keep this government in power, they are imposing that upon those people who don't want it. So we become the real victims of Conservative policy because of the people who simply don't care, don't do the investigation, don't do the research, also have a low level of empathy, etc., that are preserving their power base. So they are complicit. They must accept that. They are complicit in what comes next.
Absolutely.
Right, Tom, talking about a complicit politician, let's move on to Mr. Richard Drax, who is hopefully going to be facing some significant demonstrations and challenges in the near future. And you interviewed, well, you take us from here. You've interviewed.
So Richard Grosvenor Plunkett Ernley Earl Drax, MP for South Dorset, amongst other things, such as being the wealthiest, pretty much the wealthiest MP in Parliament. He's reputed to be worth about 150 million, and recently it was disclosed that it was uncovered that he'd not submitted company accounts for 4 of his businesses, which he said were dormant over the last 11 years since he was elected, but actually have had a turnover of hundreds of thousands of pounds. He's now, in a hurried way, had to submit those accounts to Companies House, having also been found to have not disclosed a number of things on the House of Commons Register of Members' interests, including sort of things that he owned, land in particular that he owned. So on top of those things, it's come to light that he has inherited the family's slave plantation, as it was, in Barbados, the Drax Hall estate, and the people of Barbados, the people of Barbados, the government of Barbados, CARICOM, have been requesting that he enter into dialogue with them about the future of the Drax Hall estate in Barbados, and essentially as part of reparations for him to relinquish ownership of the Drax Hall estate. So I was very lucky earlier this week to have a chat with both Grafton Straker and Henrietta Nicolette, who are from Stand Up to Racism Dorset, to talk about the issue and about an event on Saturday coming up, Saturday the 17th of July. So we'll hear about that from them. Hi, and welcome to 10 by 6. Lovely to see you both. Hi.
Thank you, Tom.
Hi. So for the viewers, it's a big welcome to Henrietta and Grafton. So Henrietta Nicolette is co-secretary, and Grafton Straker is the co-chair of Stand Up to Racism Dorset. So thank you very, very much, both of you, for giving up the time to have a chat with us for 10 by 6 today. So as we've heard, I want to chat with you about the MP for Dorset, for South Dorset, Conservative MP Richard Drax, and his ownership, his family's historical ownership of the Drax Hall estate in Barbados, and the calls on him to relinquish ownership of that and enter into a conversation about that. Grafton, if I start with you, you actually grew up in Barbados before travelling the world and so forth. Tell us a little bit about that. What was life like for you growing up in Barbados? I'm fascinated.
Hello, Tom.
Hi.
Thanks for interviewing me. Growing up in Barbados is, as you know, Barbados is a lovely little island. It used to be called Little England in my youth. Nice, beautiful place. in my teens, when I was going to Barbados, I see people cutting sugar cane, and just to see the white man on a horseback, but I didn't realize that at that time it was still slavery still going on in Barbados. As I said, we wasn't told this in school. It's only as I get older and realize what was going on in Barbados that I see slavery was still happening in Barbados, and this was in the 60s and 70s, which I thought slavery was abolished. I didn't realize it was still going on until I read about it, and then it come to the fore that Richard Drax was still having slave work in the plantation in Barbados. And Richard Drax was one of the richest family in England. So,
when you say slavery, I mean, obviously, back in the day, people were stolen from their lands to work in Barbados. Modern forms of slavery are sort of exploitation in terms of being paid very, very low wages and not treated well. Is that the case?
Well, yeah, it was, the wages wasn't that well paid. I know a family that used to work on the plantation, and it wasn't really well paid. And in those days, cutting sugar cane is very hard labor and back breaking. And you used to see these people doing it. I was still a teenager then, so I was going to school and playing sports and whatnot. But I didn't realize that it was still slavery in my country, and we was never taught in school about it, which I find it very disappointing.
I understand you say that it was a little bit of a hushed up. The whole issue of the history of slavery in Barbados was kind of hushed up. It wasn't something that was spoken about much in school. Is that the case?
That's correct. And you think in school they would teach you your history about slavery, and slavery is only coming to light now about Richard Drax.
Yeah. So the Drax family were heavily involved right from the start to right to the end of slavery, including in Barbados, and in particular in Barbados. Can you tell us a bit about what that meant for the people that were enslaved?
Well, you had the Drax family. I think Barbados had about 10 plantations. So it wasn't only Richard Drax, but some of the other plantations was handed back to the government of Barbados. And as I said, I'm surprised that in this day and age that Richard Drax is still having that plantation in Barbados instead of handing it over back to the government of Barbados.
Yeah. And where did the people, the people that worked on the plantation to create vast profits, where did they originate from?
Well, I presume they're always from Barbados. Well, some used to come from Barbados. You used to get some coming over from St. Vincent to cut sugar cane for the plantations. So it's like exploitation that was going on in Barbados. And this was the 60s, 70s.
Right, and going back to the days of actual slavery on the plantation, so people were stolen from their lands in Africa, the various countries, probably on the west coast of Africa or the east coast.
I presume that's where they come from.
Yeah. And we understand that around 30,000 slaves died over a couple of 100-year period that the plantation ran. We know a little from historical documents now about conditions they were, that they were held in, how they were treated. Can you describe that a little bit for us, Grafton?
Well, I can't say I've seen them mistreated, but I presume they were mistreated, and there have to be burial grounds in some of these plantations.
Yeah.
It'd be nice to excavate the land to see if there's any bodies around these plantations in Barbados.
I know that you mentioned elsewhere recently that they've just discovered hundreds and hundreds of bodies in Canada, haven't they? In a similar situation, and that may even be the case at places like the Drax estate in Barbados. They may uncover a lot of skeletons.
Yeah, it has to be the case. And as Lalu just said, there will be bodies there. You just need to excavate the land.
Yeah.
So it'd be nice for Mr. Drax to hand the land back over to the people of Barbados.
Absolutely, Grafton. Well, with that in mind, let me come to you, Henny. Tell us a bit. Could you tell the viewers a little bit about the campaign for slavery justice, sort of generally, and in specific relation to Drax and Drax Hall?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me on. I believe that the issue of reparations almost takes on a new kind of urgency as an emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement that really proliferated in summer of 2020. I think there, is what we can see, especially with Drax, is that there is a global cause for reparation in where we can see a direct, grotesque manifestation from slave ownership into the position of power that he's in today. That's, that's a direct correlation that has since had such beyond damaging consequences for example, in the people to the people of Barbados. I think as well, what is interesting in the case of Drax is that when he's asked, about his past, about his family's ancestry, he says, and quoted, like he chooses to ignore it. And I think that response, as up until I think 2020, has been a response that the United Kingdom has kind of taken on. As I believe it's echoed in the education systems, in institutions, like that echoes the sentiment. I believe that the UK in particular was very effective at racial gaslighting, and I think when we call for reparations, we are confronting this and saying that it's enough. So Richard Drax is the owner of 15,000 acres in Dorset, but also of the Drax Hall estate, which is one of the largest sugar plantations in the Caribbean, 621 acres, which he is still profiting off till today. Which I would say is, if anyone was to ask the question as to why this is important now, I think we have to remember that this is still profitable and he is still making money off this sugar plantation today.
And historically, his family, for those that don't know, his ancestor John Earl Drax, at the end of slavery and sort of emancipation, 1836, his ancestor John Earl Drax was paid compensation for having to give up ownership of human beings, 189 human beings that he owned, and he was paid compensation, which of course was paid, as I say, to the slave owners, not to the slaves. Extraordinary. The compensation he was paid was £4,293, 12 shillings and sixpence, which has been estimated to equate to about £3 million in today's money. It was a vast fortune. And that money, of course, has gone into the Drax family, their estate in Dorset, and their ownership of other land and so forth, and their wealth over the years. So this call, this campaign for slavery justice and for the people of Barbados, what's it sort of asking Drax to do in relation to the estate in Barbados? Any?
I mean, we're purely asking to, ignite a conversation with him. We want, to engage. We want him to engage in dialogue with the people of Barbados who are asking for the return of this estate.
So engaging with the Barbadian government and the people to look at paying reparations by returning the estate to the people there. Yeah. Wow, fabulous. Okay, Grafton. So if that happened, if Mr. Drax entered into conversation and decided to relinquish ownership of the Drax Hall estate, what would you say that would mean for the people of Barbados, and how would it be utilised?
Well, if he handed that, or when he handed the land or the plantation back to the people of Barbados, Well, if the people of Barbados utilize the land, they can make the plantation into a museum and let the people of Barbados work the land and let the government do what they want to do with the land or the plantation of Barbados. We don't want Drax to keep on profiting from sugarcane in Barbados. Slavery finished years and years, billions years ago. It's about time rich Mr. Drax get out of Barbados and give the land back to the people of Barbados.
Indeed, and one of the sort of slogans of the campaign is "Time's up, Mr. Drax."
Time's up, Mr. Drax. Time's up. Yeah. 621 acres, hand it back.
So the people in government of Barbados have suggested that the land, as you say, the land could be used by the people, to pay decent wages, and the profits from the sugar estate can be utilised by the Barbadian government, and the actual house there, the Drax Hall, can be used as a museum to educate people about the history of slavery and so forth.
Yeah.
So how would, if the profits of the plantation went to the Barbadian government, the Barbadian people, how would that be used to benefit them? What's an alternative to it going into the pockets of Richard Drax?
Well, it goes to the government and the people of Barbados, or the government of Barbados get the people to work the land, and the people of Barbados benefit from that plantation. I mean, like, you can build houses for people in Barbados on that land. Some people still have 4 houses in Barbados. Mr. Drax is still making money from that land. He's making enough money from Parliament in this country that he's not declaring. So hand the land back over to the people of Barbados. Let the people of Barbados work the land, agriculture the land for themselves, and let the government make the land profitable for the people of Barbados.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, thank you. And just finally focusing on an event next Saturday, the 17th of July. There's a big event planned outside Drax's ancestral estate in Dorset. So, Henny, tell us a bit. What's happening and why?
Yep. So on Saturday, at 11:30, there will be a rally outside the Scarborough estate, at which he resides. So we will assemble at 11:30 at Winterbourne, Zelston, and we will walk alongside the wall before we reach a gate. And we have, in fact, actually asked Mr. Drax to meet us to engage in conversation. Whether or not he'll show is another story. It's a completely safe route that has been mapped out. And we will peacefully rally with a range of speakers, and we will then return to the assembly point where we will there will be music played that has been written specifically for the event, and it's inside. The event will be live streamed alongside the Toll Pot Martyrs Festival. If there's anyone who wishes to come, there will be a coach running in Dorset that goes from Portland to Weymouth and through Dorchester. If anyone is interested in getting a ticket for the coach, you're able to contact reparationriders@gmail.com, where you can make contact and organise a ticket. We encourage everyone to come. Yeah, it would be great to see as many people there as possible.
Fantastic, and it's going to be live streamed as part of the Toll Puddle Martyrs Festival this year, and also, as you say, and also some hoping to be joined by politicians representing the government and people of Barbados via some sort of live link as well, that's fantastic. It's amazing. Yeah. So, well, thanks for that, Henny. Hopefully, that's made people have a think about learning more about it, maybe even coming along next Saturday. It's described as a family-friendly event. The small route for the walk, it's only a short 5-minute walk, and it's as Henny said, it's a safe route away from roads and traffic. So yeah, do think of coming along Well, I'd like to thank both of you, Grafton and Henrietta. Thank you so much for joining us and letting us know all about the campaign for slavery justice. And let's hope the event next Saturday is a big success. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
That was extremely informative, Tom.
Yeah, it was great, and hopefully people are now more aware of some of the truth behind Richard Drax, the MP for South Dorset. Maybe people will be inspired to learn a bit more. Lots of information on the Stand Up to Racism Dorset Facebook page, and maybe even come along to the event on Saturday the 17th.
Definitely. And this is purely by coincidence, but the next topic we're moving into is talking about arsenic and toxic metals. And not that I would ever want to equate arsenic and toxic metals with particular or any Tory politician, but this is an extremely scary story that's coming out of the US, especially given the inference that's coming out of the Conservative government in relation to trade deals, and specifically in this instance with the US, and how they have found high levels of toxic metals, and I say arsenic, lead, cadmium, and mercury. In some cases, up to 200% higher. Sorry, no. Up to, is it 200%? I can't remember now. Basically, but it's extremely high levels of arsenic that are much higher than what you would normally expect to find in some foods. Now, I think the question probably needs to be asked, would we or should we ever normally expect to find any toxic metals in our food? And I'm sure that the food industry would give us a scientific rationale as to why they end up finding themselves there. So let's accept that. But what we then have to challenge is, okay, if there's a normal level, which is believed to be completely non-affecting our morbidity and our health, but we find ourselves in a situation where there's extremely high levels coming from specific companies. But of course, the other issue you've got is baby food. So we're talking not here just about, I don't know, an adult walking into a shop and buying something, a sausage roll or something for themselves, which is their own personal choice. We're talking about baby food where the individual in this instance has no choice because it's imposed upon them by their parents or carers. And the actual company that has been located in the United States is called, get this, Happy Baby. Happy Baby. So what they seem to be doing, Tom, is they seem to be creating this positive label in terms of, happy baby. And yet, when you look into the detail, the chances are that that baby growing up to be a happy young person or adult are reduced considerably. Why are they reduced considerably? Because the biological effects are devastating, resulting in neurological conditions, cancers, heart disease, and many osteoporosis, many other side effects that can affect them in terms of their long-term health. So obviously the question is, why are we allowing this? Why do these food agencies in the United States, why they've done nothing for so long, even though they know this is occurring? And one of the things it got me thinking about is, if the Americans have an insurance-based healthcare system, and if that insurance-based healthcare system is very much primed towards the idea of maximizing profits, how do you maximize profits, Tom, within healthcare? Well, ultimately, what you have to do is make the population unhealthy. You have to make the population want to seek health care, because that is the way in which the insurance companies will maximize their income. So if people might say, well, that's absolutely rubbish, what evidence have you got for that? Well, I suppose at the end of the day, it's about logical thought. On the one hand, private healthcare, which many people argue we shouldn't have, it should be taxpayers, it should be maximizing the health of the country. It should be ensuring that as many people as possible can go from cradle to grave, and the gap between the two is long. And while you're going through that process of living your life, that you experience as few illnesses as possible. Yet in a system that's dependent upon profit, the argument surely is reversed. They have no incentive for a whole population to be largely healthy if it means that the amount of money that they have coming in is significantly reduced. So a lot of people may be cynically saying that actually the correspondence, the relationship that exists between the insurance companies and the major corporations that provide and produce food are probably in themselves not very healthy either.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right, Jason. I mean, you've highlighted all sorts of enormous issues, in America, but obviously due to trade deals that we very much need to be aware of for here. I mean, who knows whether health insurance companies in America are deliberately promoting things that are unhealthy. But of course, when they're, as you highlight, when they're ruthless, and which they are, and when their entire modus operandi is based on profit, not health, then I wouldn't put anything past them. I wouldn't put it past them, for example, for health insurance company lobbyists to also lobby for things relating to food standards, to not be high, pollution, air pollution, things like that, water pollution. Wouldn't be at all surprised if they were lobbying for freeing up companies that pollute the environment from regulation, from too much regulation. There's probably a link between those different types of lobbyists that are all helping each other to maximise the profits in those industries.
And of course, they're employed. You're absolutely right, Tom. They're employed because they are successful lobbyists. They command huge, huge fees because what they've done in the past has allowed them to sometimes get around legislation, help create legislation, help persuade politicians to come on board at the detriment of the population they're supposed to be serving. And effectively, what we have now is a potential for the UK to be getting in bed with the food standards agencies in the United States, to be accepting their level of measurement of what is and what isn't healthy, as opposed to ours. And this goes back, I think, to one of the quotes that came out of the 1980s about the UK becoming, or seeking to become, the 51st state of America. Well, this will give a lot more credibility to that argument 40 years on-ish, if our negotiation with the United States leads to babies having a lot more arsenic in their food or mercury in their food, and the population as a whole consuming into their, into their bodies, into their biologies, chemicals that we haven't been able to evolve quickly enough in order to create immunity to. So even if in the longer term, higher levels of arsenic don't detrimentally affect humanity, let's say in 500 years' time, in the short to medium term it will, because our bodies will have to go through that process of adjustment in order to compensate for toxic metals that they haven't experienced before.
Yeah. And what's of obvious concern, and it's a project fear issue, isn't it? That
yes.
As a result of Brexit, we're entering into trade agreements with other countries. Australia and America in particular have been cited regularly in terms of standards. And we're looking at, I think, three things that got labelled as project fear and the government have absolutely lied to the public about: food standards, environmental protections, and workers' rights. Those are the three issues where people that were keen to remain in the European Union raised as issues that if we left the European Union, and particularly under a Conservative government and under a Conservative government that are clearly very intent on striking large trade deals with America and allowing American corporations to take over whole swathes of our country, including public services, including the NHS. So people were arguing there are concerns about food standards, about environmental protections, about workers' rights. And of course, the Conservatives constantly lied and said, we will keep the standards as they currently are, or they will be even better. We will be free to make them even better. And of course, they just lied about that. You know, it was no one apart from Conservative voters ever believed them. And of course, you know, and labelled those concerns as Project Fear. And now, of course, almost on a daily or at least weekly basis, we hear about details of trade deals. And of course, sometimes we're not hearing about them because they're all in secret. But when they are leaked, when we do hear about those details, we find that food standards are going to be lower, that environmental protections are going to be dropped and are going to be lower, and workers' rights could well be lowered or infringed in some way because that maximises profits for the owners of industry. So huge concerns, and you know, so we've chlorine washed chickens and hormone injected beef and you know, arsenic in baby food. It was all labelled Project Fear, and now it's, you know, now it's a reality. If we want trade deals with these countries, we've got to accept their standards, which include those things. Yes. And yeah, I mean, on the plus side, hopefully it's going to make a huge amount, a huge percentage more of the population turn vegetarian, which is in itself good for the planet. Because I'm not going to eat hormone injected beef or chlorine washed chicken. So yeah, more and more people, I guess, will turn to locally sourced organic vegetarian products, which is probably a good thing. But you know, these are shocking things we shouldn't accept.
No, and I think you're absolutely right. Although I'm constantly concerned about the nature of healthier food in that sense, demanding a completely different lifestyle. You need. It's not just about being able to afford these foods, often are more expensive. It's about having the time and the capacity to be able to then produce these foods yourself, as opposed to bunging them in a microwave and sticking them on a plate and then opening up a can of beer and watching the footy. It's about eating properly, producing properly. And I think that's a whole skill set that we need a radical overhaul within our society. We need to almost go back to pre-industrial in terms of being able to identify foods ourselves, identify, you know, herbs ourselves, whatever, but then being able to bring them together and creating a healthy concoction of food, even if it takes, you know, an hour or so. And then we sit down with that meal, we sit down with the people, and we engage ourselves, and we don't just stare at the box in the corner. It's actually about a much richer experience, a richer essence, if you like, to our lives. But I fear, unfortunately, Tom, that within our class-based system, there are so many people who just wouldn't be able to take that seriously on a whole number of levels. But that does lead us in perfectly to our next topic, which was a demonstration that locally at the MacDonalds in Weymouth for last weekend, in which there was a sort of a sit-in in which they were trying to put pressure on the local McDonald's. But it wasn't just Weymouth, it was also across the country. A whole number of activists from Animal Rebellion and Extinction Rebellion were occupying these spaces and also preventing the places where McDonald's gets their products from, and it slowed down and reduced the capacity for McDonald's over a short space of time in that time frame. But it's about putting pressure on McDonald's to change their policy to go to a plant-based diet by 2005. And I caught up with Emma Smart, and she talked us through the demonstration that she was part of and why they were doing it. Hi, Emma Smart. Welcome back to 10 by 6.
Hi, Jason. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a privilege to have you back on again, because obviously you were on our first show as well. But this week we're talking about your sit-in last weekend at the local McDonald's, talking about the idea of them making that transition to plant-based products by 2025. So can you just talk us through how you experienced it and what was going on more generally?
Yeah, so I'm part of Animal Rebellion, which is a sister movement to Extinction Rebellion, with the added demand that we transition to a plant-based food system. Just to put the action into context, about a month ago, Animal Rebellion blockaded the main four McDonald's distribution centres in the UK for up to 30 hours and completely disrupted the supply chain. And their demand is that McDonald's go fully plant-based by 2025. Now, on the back of this action, it's a kind of a series of escalating actions to keep putting the pressure on McDonald's. We're organising these sit-ins, and we had one in Weymouth. There were 10 of us. We peacefully went inside the restaurant, if you can call it that, and occupied tables, sat. We brought our own plant-based food picnics with us, and we sat for 2 hours. We had leaflets and information. We had some really good conversations with customers and staff, and since have got some good press and media coverage about the action, which is also really good about starting this conversation about McDonald's and their responsibilities. So yeah, it was a good action.
Fantastic. And why particularly do you think it's important, not only to the planet more generally, but also the individual consumer? How can they benefit by making that transition to plant-based products and supporting the cause?
I mean, I think in terms of switching to a plant-based diet, there are different things that people have different priorities. I mean, there's personal health to start with. I mean, in this country, we're seeing an obesity crisis amongst adults and children. We know that eating meat increases our cholesterol and our risk of heart disease, diabetes, different types of cancer. Like, meat is not good for our health, particularly processed meat. There's also the animal welfare side of that. So animal agriculture is just so huge now. Just to put it into context, all mammals on the planet, 60% of mammals on the planet are farmed animals. So cows, sheep, chickens. 36% are humans, and only 4% of animals on Earth are wild animals. So it's an industry that's such a large scale now that the planet simply can't sustain it. So there's that animal welfare side. They're not kept in particularly nice conditions. They're cramped. They're killed prematurely, and yeah, it's not a nice industry at all. Welfare standards are very low, and to produce cheap meat, that's how they have to be produced on an industrial scale. Other aspects that people can think about are the planet and the climate and ecological emergency that we're currently facing. Animal agriculture contributes 15% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and that's huge, and it's an area that we could cut really quickly. The impact of a meat burger compared to a plant-based burger: they use 90% less water to make a plant-based burger, 95% less land. Just imagine all that land that's used up by grazing cows, and like 95% less emissions to produce a plant-based burger. So from a planet and climate perspective, switching is essential. And also in terms of McDonald's, we know that McDonald's are responsible for massive deforestation in the Amazon, which inflicts on indigenous tribes and people. But people right here in the UK, there's a lot of exploitation of workers. Many of them are on 0-hour contracts, minimum wage, not protected by any union. So, we're sort of standing up for those people as well who have rights. And finally, the one that's been brought to our attention very recently with COVID is this link between animal agriculture, eating meat, and pandemics. COVID came from wildlife. In fact, 3 out of 4 new diseases to humans come from animals. And industrial farming, this intensive, stressed animals in cramped conditions, is the perfect condition for viruses to jump from wildlife to humans. So if we want a future without pandemics, we need to cut down on our meat consumption and production. So they're the main reasons, I think, why people should really be taking this seriously.
And even for those individuals who, let's say, don't care at all about the wildlife, they have no interest in the impact it has upon mammals or more generally biodiversity. What about the impact upon them as individuals of eating meat-based products in terms of, cancers, etc.? That surely is something as well that maybe they should be focusing upon.
Yeah, I think so. From a personal health point of view, switching to a plant-based diet is one of the best things you can do for your health. And food technology has come on, it's so advanced now that you can buy so many replacements, especially with McDonald's kind of processed food, things like burgers and sausages and nuggets. They're all processed. They can be so easily replicated using plant-based soya and things like that instead, that you could barely tell the difference. So it's really a win-win. It's a win for your health, it's a win for animal welfare, it's a win for the planet, and there's no reason why McDonald's can't still produce fast food. And we're not trying to stop families who can't afford maybe to go to an expensive restaurant having a cheap treat lunch, but we're saying that as the biggest globally fast food company, McDonald's have a responsibility to be more sustainable and more health conscious. And so we're not trying to spoil anyone's lunch here. We're just saying, they have a responsibility, and we as individuals can benefit from that also.
And while as activists, you have it challenging, obviously anyway, but at least with COVID, the states across the planet, nations across the planet, were very much behind the procedure, so they could bring in legislation to control people's behavior. You don't have that luxury, do you, in terms of trying to get this message across, because most governments are either controlled or in the pockets of huge billionaire corporations and lobbyists who effectively have no particular interest in reducing meat-based products, because they make so much money from it. And also, we must admit here that a lot of politicians are simply ignorant. It's not just malice, is it? It's also ignorance.
Yeah, I mean, the meat lobby is incredibly powerful and incredibly wealthy, and it certainly has very close links with our government. I mean, our government currently has written in its climate mitigation policy to reduce consumption of meat and dairy by 20%, but that hasn't been in the newspapers or people made informed of that. And it's interesting you mentioned COVID, actually, because when we're faced with an emergency, we can make changes in our lifestyles. I mean, literally overnight, we found ourselves at home, not able to go anywhere, not able to travel. We were working from home. Our whole lives changed overnight, instantly. And that was possible, and we did it. And the climate crisis is 1,000 times worse than COVID. And one of the simplest things we can do is change our diet, and we can do it. COVID has shown that we can change our lifestyles very quickly, and this is a way that as individuals we can make changes, but we are also really putting the spotlight on these big companies and industries and saying, you have the responsibility to make these changes also, to provide alternatives to your customers that are both sustainable for the planet and better for individuals' health. So we feel this is a really strong message and a really achievable demand.
Yeah. In terms of the press coverage that you've received, as we all know, you're going to have people who are very, very positive, very, very constructive, who can consider it and think about it. But on the other hand, you're going to have those people who are always angry, always object to people telling them how they should be living their lives and transforming their own existences. What would be your message to the latter, to those people, in terms of those people also who say that, what can I do? Even if I make a change, it doesn't really make any difference in the long term. So what would your final message be to them?
I think just to talk about your point about being defensive, you know, if you don't want to listen to us, listen to David Attenborough. I mean, he says we must change our diet. You know, we can't support a growing population in a crisis and keep eating meat. The United Nations have also said to avoid a global catastrophe. That's the language that the UN are using. We have to reduce meat consumption drastically. So if you don't want to listen to us, you know, listen to some of those guys. And in terms of people who feel that they can't change anything, absolutely disagree. We all have so much power, and every time we buy something, we are essentially voting for that. You know, when we buy a burger, we're saying, I agree, I vote. I think that, yes, destroying rainforests and wasting this much resources, water, land, deforestation, it's okay, I agree with that. And if you change, if you don't buy that product, that sends a huge message to companies and suppliers, because you affect the demand. And we have much more personal power than we think we do. And historically, big changes have been made by groups of small groups of individuals. So never think that you don't have the power to change things. And it always starts with one person, and others will follow. So yeah, believe in yourself and the power that you have, even when things seem so massive and daunting.
Yes, thank you so much, Emma. That's a brilliant positive message, and a very powerful message to liberate individuals. To finish off this interview, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. Will you take care, and I'll speak to you very, very soon.
Thanks very much, Jason. Thank you.
Wonderful from Emma Smart yet again. Also, she's on the show in our first edition, 10 or 11 weeks ago now. But it's great to have the perspective of the activist who's working, and I think you tied it up really lovely, you know, with the previous topic, going into, you know, hopefully increasing the number of people who will consider reducing their meat content, who will consider even crossing over and becoming vegetarians, or even becoming vegans, because ultimately, when you look at the major reason that we are where we are in terms of climate change and the catastrophe that's literally on our doorsteps, farming and industrial farming is right at the heart of it. Right, going on to topic number 5, and it's coming home apparently, Tom. It's coming home after England's just a tough fixture last night against Denmark. At one point, I have to admit that I felt like John Hurt in Alien. I really did. I felt the creature was coming out of my chest cavity, and I was going to at least double the population in the room, because it just like, it was heaving. But it was a tense game. But we've still got one more massive tense game to come on Sunday. But our focus is not on applauding England just yet. Maybe we can do that next week, or hopefully we can do that next week. Our focus is on a letter that you wrote to Gareth Southgate, which maybe we could have discussed last week, because, you know, the pessimist in us might have suggested that we were going to go out. But we kept it till this week, and yeah. I think it's probably the best time to do it, leading up to the final. And I think the euphoria or the disappointment after the final, probably this might get lost a little bit. And I'm kind of hoping also that, you know, as you rightly pointed out when we discussed this, is that hopefully Gareth stood up in the changing rooms at some point, or in the team hotel, or on the training ground, and read this out to them, because I think it's well worth them hearing, and I think it's well worth the population hearing too. So if you want to sort of read it out and give your comments, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, sure. It's deliberately just a short letter, because I doubt he has a lot of time at the moment. But I hoped I emailed it via the FA and also the FA's equality diversity officer, with the request that they pass it on to Gareth's team. I hope they have, and I hope that maybe Gareth might have read it and may have shared it with players as a kind of inspirational thing. It's only short, but it was written after the Germany game, so before the quarter-final against Ukraine. And it says, "Dear Gareth, I'm a youth worker in Dorset and a lifelong football fan who's coached a little. I'm writing to let you know that I'm proud of you and that you are making a difference. I'm beyond delighted at the team's progress in the tournament so far, and the performance against Germany was truly outstanding. But my statement refers, as in my statement saying I'm proud of them, my statement refers to a vitally important non-playing aspect. Your decision, along with the players, to continue to support the movement for racial justice by taking the knee before games is both brave and significant. Your letter to the nation, letter written by Gareth Southgate to the nation on the eve of the tournament, your letter to the nation was, in my opinion, an intelligent and important message, which I hope resonated with the majority of England fans and the public, even if a minority continue to act negatively. When studying for my degree, I read of little black children here in the UK who had poured bleach on and scrubbed bleach into their skin to try to become white. 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old children. As a youth worker, I've seen the despicable effect of racism on young lives. The actions of the current England football team, led by you as manager, mean that our children of today will proudly believe that Black Lives Matter. They will also grow up believing that it is right to stand up for equality and justice. Children of all ages, black and white, will be wearing England shirts with Sterling and Kane, Saka and Grealish, Maguire and Rashford, and dreaming of playing for England one day, knowing they are valued. As role models for our children and recognising the influence your position on stamping out racism has on British society, you are already winners. I wish you and the team my best wishes for the rest of the tournament. Yours sincerely." Yes, I really hope he got to read it and that it might have meant something to him and perhaps to the team if they saw it too. I hope so.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes. And it may even be, hopefully that if he hasn't read it out so far, if we're successful on Sunday evening and once they've had a day or so to drink lots of water, should we say, that he'll get them all together and he'll read it out then. Because even if they are successful against Italy, I totally agree with you. I think that equally successful will be the way in which they have presented themselves as challenging those who are negatively impacting upon social justice. So they're challenging racists, they're challenging homophobes. And I think, with Harry Kane wearing the rainbow captain's armband as well, that was also making an extremely significant point. And I really applaud the way in which the Germans handled the situation once the homophobic stuff was identified coming out of Hungary, in which they responded so positively. And that's, at the end of the day, that's what we want to see. For those people who say we shouldn't be mixing politics and sport, I know we've had this conversation before, we're not going to have it again, but the point is they're talking out of an orifice halfway down their body. They're talking out of that orifice, and the reason they're doing it is because actually they don't want their prejudice, they don't want their bigotry to be challenged by sporting superstars or cultural icons, because it makes them feel uncomfortable. It makes them feel uncomfortable, Tom. Fantastic. They should feel uncomfortable. If you're a bigot, you deserve everything you get. Because until you start to stand back and rethink where you're at, why you think that way, and how it impacts upon others. And that's exactly what England's football team are doing. What's the impact upon others? And how can we make it better? So it's a sensational letter.
And yeah, thank you. Thanks, that's kind. And yeah, I really hope Gareth Southgate gets to read it and it means something to him and perhaps the players. I mean, it is, in my view, it is great to see an England football team and a manager who care about social justice issues and are sticking to their principles and together as a squad. And I think in doing this, it has created a special kind of togetherness that we can see in the pitch and the results. there are ways that managers during a tournament try to create a real cohesion within a squad, a sense of togetherness where you fight for each other and believe in each other. And traditionally you go and play golf and you maybe have a few beers together or whatever in the past, a few decades ago, and you have a laugh and so forth. These days, there are different ways that managerial teams approach that instilling of togetherness. Nothing can still instill togetherness in a squad like believing that you all stand for the same thing in terms of humanity, in terms of just issues like justice and equality, for the whole team to be talking about those issues and saying, we're going to stand for this. It's important to us as human beings, and hearing each other. A lot of players have experienced racism and stood up against it. Others hadn't so much. 8 out of 11 of the starting lineup from last night's game, semi-final game, 8 out of 11 had a parent, at least one parent or grandparent who came to England from abroad, who were immigrants. 8 out of 11, a staggering statistic. So yeah, I mean, what a way to actually engender cohesion and togetherness and wanting to fight for each other than creating this environment where they all feel free to stand up for equality and for justice, racial justice, justice in terms of things like sexuality, and of course there's Rashford in the squad, who has taken a stand against poverty and starving children in this country, and child literacy. He's now working, having shamed the government into feeding some of our poverty-stricken kids. Rashford is now campaigning to get hundreds of thousands of free books for our poorest kids so they can read. I mean, what a superstar he is.
Well, he's a superstar. He's a superstar, Tom. I have to say, Tom, sorry, he's a superstar on the pitch.
Yeah.
And at the same time, he's been leader of the opposition for the last 16 months.
He did what? Sorry,
he's been the leader of the opposition for the last 16 months too.
Yeah,
being a superstar
yeah. I mean, he's been doing Starmer's job for him. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, quite. There was a meme going around, wasn't there, of because Starmer had an England shirt on, and there was somebody tweeted something like, not surprised to see Starmer with an England shirt on because Rashford's been doing his job for him for the last couple of years. So
yeah.
Anyway, no, just I mean, it's a time to feel proud of obviously of our England team, not in some false patriotism, nationalistic, flag waving, way that the far right and the racists love and Tory politicians love to promote. No, not that. But to feel proud of them for their achievements on the pitch. I mean, first time in my lifetime that we've made the final of a major tournament, World Cup or European Championships. In my lifetime, I'm 53. So tremendous, and actually it's probably the last couple of games, at least the first time in my lifetime I've seen England properly play international style football successfully. Used to watch us give the ball away, thump 50-yard balls forward in the air, give it away immediately, and then chase around the other team while they pass it around for 5 minutes and beat us. So how great to see us keep possession and be patient and play a style of football that is the international way and be successful at it. And Southgate and his team have to take enormous, his backroom staff, his coaching staff have to take all the credit for that. So fantastic for what they've achieved on the pitch. But I personally feel doubly proud of them because they've chosen to take a stance on equality issues, and great for them. Fabulous.
Absolutely.
Really proud. Really
Absolutely.
proud.
Yeah. Fantastic. And as I say, hopefully this time next week, we're discussing on the show the bringing together of successes on the pitch and off it in terms of mutually coordinated collective effort. Fantastic. Last topic of the day. We probably haven't covered this as much as we should have done in the last 2 or 3 weeks, but it focuses back on green issues, people coming together, being empowered in order to help create a much more environmentally friendly environments, both in the east of the council with Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, and Dorset Council, which say covers the rest of Dorset. And we're focusing, just a limited amount of time, but just focusing upon a couple of articles that have come up on Dorset Eye in the last week, few days. Again, one on the east side of the county, and one on the south side, west side, north side, however you want to look at it. And you've got the empowerment part comes from the invitation from Weymouth Council to the public of the borough to have their say on open spaces, and there's an incentive to be entered into a prize draw. Incentives are there for various reasons, and we don't need to go into all of that, but it'd be great if people can go onto this article, click on the link, and actually just play a part in being positive. How can we make things better? I mean, if you're full of negativity, please, my advice is just stay away to people. If you really want to play an empowered, constructive part in making your community better now and in the future, then please get involved, because it's just it's a great project, and I say you might even win a prize for doing so, which is terrific. And we also have Christchurch and Poole, who are trying to get us to get involved. But there's also, here we go, Christchurch Bay and Harbour from future flood erosion. So it's not here, the council stepping forward and saying, this is what we're going to do dogmatically, like it or lump it. They want people who lived in the area. They want people with knowledge, maybe geoengineering or whatever, but they want people to come forward and say, hey, have you thought about this? Or this is how it's going to impact on me. Is there a way in which maybe we can modify it, negotiate it a little bit, so that actually it doesn't impact on myself or my neighbours or my community quite the same way. And going forward, it will be something we can all buy into. So I think we're not focusing here directly on, green issues, voting for the Green Party, whatever. We're focusing upon empowerment. How can we be involved, and how can we participate in something that hopefully in the short, medium and long term makes us all better off?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, great to see these initiatives, green initiatives, and transforming cities thing at Kings Park in the east of the county, and the consultation on parks and open spaces in Weymouth area. But as you say, we often focus on the green issues. We just wanted to emphasise that point, that a lot of this now it's about empowerment of local people, and that's a big part of this theme of Build Back Better, which everyone from politicians to all sorts of campaigners have grabbed that little message and used it. Well, actually, it was something, the Build Back Better theme was something that was a kind of grassroots movement used that terminology during the pandemic, and then politicians have usurped it. I would say, and often when they say build back better, they actually mean build back how it was, because we were advantaged by that system.
Yes.
But yeah, the true build back better is actually grassroots, community-led, bottom-up approaches, finding solutions to issues faced by people, by families, by communities. In a bottom-up way, where people are engaged, people are empowered, and find their own solutions. And so that's a good way to build back better, is to have a bottom-up approach, empowering local people to make their communities better places for themselves, their families, their neighbours, and taking part, just simply taking part in consultations about things like parks and open spaces, for example. It's just a way to have your voice. And the more we start to adopt those approaches where we say, what do local people think? Let's go with that. How can we support local people to make decisions, to be proactive, to do things for themselves, to improve their community? And how can we invest in people locally to do those things? The better. That's how we build back better. Yeah,
exactly. And so say all of us, and that's a perfect place to finish. If you're going to build back better, not just a soundbite. Brilliant, Tom. Another wonderful week over. Thank you so much.
Indeed. When we speak again, we might be European champions. Who knows? Or it could be Italy, who would all be very deserving because they played extremely well too. Looking forward to the final. It's going to be, I would imagine, very close and very tense.
Yes, yes. And whether it's Roberto Mancini and his team or whether it's Southgate and his team, they've both done outstanding jobs in getting their teams this far. So yes, absolutely. You take care, and I'll see you next week.
You too, Jace. Cheers, everyone. Thanks for watching. Cheerio.
Bye.
All right, Phil.